Hey, I'm James, aka Slim Jim. This is the third in a series documenting all the features on my long-term project campervan, Bongo Fury. Last time I talked about the drivetrain upgrades and how we made it to 280 brake with 420 foot-pounds at the wheels. Take a look here if you missed that. Only a lunatic would triple the power on such a heavy vehicle without upgrading the brakes. And yes, I'm pretty crazy, but not crazy enough to ignore the requirement of stopping power. As per usual, to set the scene for all this and the current setup, we have to talk about the history and go back over the decade that I've owned the camper. When I bought the van in 2012, it had 19-inch two-piece alloys. It was way too low and it was an awful ride. So I swapped from whatever the awful chop springs were and the cheap leaking shocks to a set of Sachs HDs front and rear with Eibach 45mm lowering springs on the back. To firm up the front, we added a pair of purple, pink, whatever you say, torsion bars and a rear 28mm anti-roll bar, which we not only riveted but also welded in with Powerflex bushings. That's not going anywhere. I swapped the 19s for some stock 16-inch steels, plus a second set with winter tyres on. But even with the colour-coded centre hubcaps, they were a little bit boring, so I started looking out for some nice alloys. Nothing too big and nothing too small, so 16s or 17s would be great, but I wanted the fitment to be just right. The search began. In about 2015, my wife and I went to Busfest, which is this little VW festival near Oswestry, and I saw the wheels that I needed for the van. They're a set of 1980s Rials Type 8011s, which were put onto AMG Mercedes back in the day, back in the 80s. Unfortunately, they were on someone else's van at the time. Luckily, the van belonged to Simon Coles. Simon is not only a superb bloke and the owner of SCVW Customs, but also a guy who changes his wheels nearly as often as I change my socks. For Simon, the customer always comes first, so he took the wheels off his motor and let me have them, along with a slider kicker rail that you need for the fitment of them. I had the wheels refurbished in black with a very heavy rainbow sparkle. The company that did it for me also sanded back the colour on the logo back to silver before applying the lacquer, so you can see the logo is quite cool. They look black in the shade, but then flip colours like crazy in the sun. The main problem with them is the offset. They're 16-inch 18J H2s. H2 means double hump with an offset of ET11. If you look on the inside of them, you can see it says made in West Germany embedded in the metal, so they've got to be pre-1989. Anyway, in comparison to the stock wheels, these things stick out a huge amount, which causes a bit of an issue, not only due to regulations with MOTs, but also they actually catch and damage on the arches, so we had to do something about it. That's when I wanted to try and track down some Gold Dust, which is the Project Zoo body kit I've mentioned in previous videos. Back then, when I was looking, about 2015, they weren't as sought after as now, and I actually managed to pick up a bargain from ebay.de. It was €900, delivered from northeast of Frankfurt, and back in 2015, when the pound was very strong against the euro, it was only just over £650. Nowadays, you'd have to pay nearly double that just for a set of lights. Shipped from Germany, it arrived in good condition, although it was Frisian green and it was a left-hand drive kit. It had to be cut and fettled into a right-hand drive version, as well as converting the rear bumper from a tailgate to a barn door version, because I've got barn doors, but it was never offered as an option. Then we had to colour code it. See my first video here to learn how I converted the aesthetically pleasing yet awful powered lights to new tech LEDs. Once the body kit was on, the wheels took nicely, and after a trim of the inner metal arches, they no longer rubbed. As you know from my previous video, I'm running quite a bit more power than the stock. It's nearly 3 times as much, and only a madman would upgrade that much power and not also bring the brakes in line. The van did have drilled and grooved discs and slightly more aggressive than stock pads, but it just wasn't good enough for the power that I'm now running. After much searching and looking at off-the-shelf kits, mixing and matching OEM parts to try and come up with a good upgrade, as with nearly everything on the van, I decided to go bespoke. I found a place called BG Developments in Worcestershire, which isn't too far from me. They specialise in brakes for all sorts of performance vehicles, from one-off sports cars to supplying UK manufacturers such as Noble and McLaren. There's a crazy impressive setup down there. There's multiple warehouses and workshops filled with the latest 4-axis CNC machines, 3D printers, 3D scanners, digital 3D macrometers, as well as massive old school lathes, Bridgeport milling machines, bandsaws. It's a proper engineering setup. It only took a couple of trips down there for them to measure up and make my current front setup. The main issue they had was fitting the huge brakes under my little 16-inch Rials, but they did it. 315mm AP Racing vented discs and AP Racing 4-piston calipers. To fit them, they used one of their on-site 4-axis CNC machines to make custom carriers from a solid alloy block. Then for the floating discs, they made bells for them in a similar vein. BG not only anodized the carriers and bells black, but they also laser etched them, my name and the T17 logo on, which is really cool. And you can now buy this kit from them, which is very cool. We did a weight comparison and it was hilarious. The new caliper is lighter than the stock carrier by over 0.5 kilogram. Madness. Yes, the disc is slightly heavier, but it's a lot bigger, and the overall setup is more than 4 kilograms lighter than the OEM setup. When it comes to unsprung weight, that is a huge amount. There's lots of different formulas to show you how and why this makes a massive difference, but basically lighter is better. While we're at it, we added HEL braided brake hoses, because why would you not? The front pads are APF 404s, which have friction, bite and fade properties slightly better than Ferodo DS 25000s. Perfect for the road and occasional drag racing. The result is they are fantastic and give me real stopping power. The first iteration were slightly annoying as the discs just brushed my lower control arm, but only when I was going up or down a curb or speed bump at a reasonable steering angle. And this was all because my tiny 16-inch wheels had restricted everything, so it was really tight. And this kind of thing happens when you're working with a company to develop new products. To solve this issue, the clever guys posted me a new carrier and bell, all 3D printed, just to see if it solved the clearance issue. They even designed to give me 4 different levels of spacing to test in one 3D print. Very clever people. I tested all the different iterations by fitting them and jacking up the tyre and turning the wheel while stationary. Then they could whip up the replacements in alloy. Super cool. It's proper CAD, computer aided design, rather than my fake CAD, which is obviously cardboard aided design approach. Super impressive. Ace working with people that really know what they're doing. After 6 years of my 16s, I decided I wanted to change, and after lots of research and making sure I was going to be covered from a load rating point of view, I went for some 2-forge ZF1s. Finding load rated wheels and tyres is a much bigger pain than you'd think it would be, and I'm betting that most vans without OEM wheels and tyres are probably not legal. I looked into it and it's a really weird law. You have to, by law, have load rated wheels and tyres, but they are not a requirement on the MOT, so you don't have to check it when you have an MOT unless your vehicle's over 3,500 kilograms or is a taxi. It's crazy. Anyway, the new alloys are 18-inch by 9J with a plus 33 offset, finished in matte black, which makes them pretty much the same fitment as the Rials were, only they are 2 inches taller and 1 inch wider. I also decided, keeping with the black look, to upgrade to Garage Midnight studs and nut kit rather than wheel bolts. I highly recommend this setup. I think they look great and they make it a lot easier to put wheels on and off if you do that on a regular basis. They look superb, but just that little bit plain, so I added a 5mm yellow strip to one on each of the wheel spokes. Not just for looks, but it also sits opposite the tyre valves, as well as indicating where the locking wheel nut is. Once these more open wheels were on, you could see how brilliant the front brakes looked, but how awful the rear brakes were, so I decided to upgrade those. Taking them apart, it turned out they hadn't been working properly, probably for a long time. The pads were rusty and the piston on the driver's side was seized. So I took them all apart and sent them off to BiggRed to be refurbished, along with some Chiran 150 brake horsepower carriers to let me go from a 280mm disc to 294mm. The hardware came back very quickly. It looked brand new, well, better than brand new, black. They looked superb. I rebuilt it all with grooved 294mm discs and Ferodo FVR 1132 brake pads. It all went back together very easily, and I'd highly recommend this upgrade. It's super simple, and if I can do it, anyone can. I stole the details from a forum. I'll put a link somewhere down below. I did replace most of the hardware while I was at it because it looked like it had been under the sea for a decade or so. One of the rear carriers still had a 13mm socket on it, presumably from years ago. Mad. They've made a huge difference. Working in harmony with the fronts, I've greatly reduced my stopping distance. Trying it out, it's mad. My camera now for my dash camera actually beeps when I brake because it thinks that obviously an incident's happened and records it. They're brilliant, properly stop. Looking at the van, it's always had a rake to it, which I wanted to address by levelling it off. The rear just sat up that little bit too high, so I went back to my good friend Simon at SCVW Customs, who supplied me with a set of 6-inch 1050 pound Faulkner springs along with poly shims and retaining straps. People have said I may regret it, as they will be much firmer than the Eibachs that I took off, but I took the van to be weighed and discussed the best way forward with Simon before ordering it, and they seemed perfect. Yes, it's a firmer ride, but after I'd taken the full-length furniture out of the rear of the van, we'll talk about that in another video, the van was kind of bouncy because it was lighter on the old setup anyway. It's much better with these stiffer springs and retaining straps. Very, very happy. Firmer, yes, but much better. Well, that covers off my brakes, wheels and suspension, as well as a few other bits. My next video may well be on the cab, where I've done most of the work myself, retrofitting a passenger airbag, painting the whole dash, adding a custom switch setup, upgrading the clocks, the Golf Plus roof console, loads and loads of stuff. Look out for that video, and possibly another Q&A video, dependent on how many requests there are for more information about this video. Speaking of which, if you have any queries, comments or suggestions on this video, please leave them in the comments below. Hope to see you next time. Cheers.